Dear hotel receptionists of Reddit, who was the most horrible guest you have ever encountered? Story 1. We had a guru and her 2 associates come in once. The associates weren't allowed to speak. The guru called down to the front desk because the polyester mattress cover was interfering with her aura. She said she had to have a natural cotton fiber cover. So we found a different brand, cut out the tag that said polyester, told her it was cotton, and put it on her bed. Next day, she reported her aura was fine after sleeping on the cotton cover. Meanwhile, while we were changing her bed, her associates ate the entire week's worth of bananas in the dining room plus a shit ton of sausage. Neither one of them weighed over 100 pounds. And during all that, one of our housekeepers went into her room and found a knit comb and empty bottles of lice shampoo. Turns out a family had rented 3 or 4 different rooms all over the hotel. One of the kids had lice and was running in and out of all their rooms. I thought our manager was going to quit that day. Story 2. We had a guest whose kid squat walked a turd/diarrhea 12 feet in a line into the pool, then demanded we clean up their child's poo. Then they were upset that we had to close the pool. Also had a creepy old man come up to me asking me to bring rubber duckies to his room for his bath every night in a 5-star hotel, and I'd always just kinda nervously laugh. I'm living in far north Queensland in Australia, where there are lots of creatures. They get in sometimes. No matter how nice the hotel is, it's the rainforest. We had a guest from NZ come screaming at us about a lizard infestation because she had found a 1-inch gecko in her room. She said her kids were afraid, they were not, and it was unsanitary and unsafe. We removed the lizard, and she demanded an entire new room. Then she left a very nasty review because one of us cracked a smile at the term lizard infestation. I have so many weird stories I can't even remember half of them. Story 3. It all started when the guest checked in late one evening. He seemed normal enough until he asked, "Does my room come with a microwave?" I told it didn't. He looked absolutely devastated and said, "I cannot survive without a microwave." I offered to warm something up for him if needed, but that wasn't good enough. He stormed out and came back an hour later, dragging a full-size microwave he'd purchased from a nearby store. The trouble really started at 3 a.m. when the fire alarm went off, waking the entire hotel. Turns out, Mr. Midnight Microwave decided to cook a steak in his new appliance. Not just heat it. He'd seasoned it, wrapped it in foil, and popped it in like it was an oven. The foil caused a small fire, which set off the sprinklers in his room. By the time we got there, his room was soaked, the microwave was destroyed, and he was trying to save his steak by patting it dry with hotel towels. When asked why he'd thought this was a good idea, he replied, "I didn't know microwaves couldn't cook steak. This is your fault for not having one in the room in the first place." Needless to say, he was charged for the damage. The room was out of commission for weeks. Story 4. I used to work as a night receptionist at a hotel in Jalandhar, India a few years ago. Most nights were uneventful, but one guest will forever be burned into my memory. It was around 2 a.m. when a man came stumbling to the front desk, looking panicked. He whispered, "There's someone in my room." Naturally, I was alarmed. I immediately checked the system to ensure he hadn't been double-booked, but everything looked fine. I offered to check the room with him. As we entered, I turned on the lights, and there it was, the intruder. It was a life-sized cutout of a Bollywood actor that we had placed in the hallway for a promotion earlier that day. For some reason, he had brought it into his room, propped it in a corner, and forgotten about it. I tried to keep a straight face as he muttered something about being too tired and shuffled back to bed. The next morning, he checked out like nothing had happened. But I'll never forget having to rescue someone from their own cardboard celebrity at 2 a.m. Story 5. One night a sketchy dude came in with a really long coat. He looked like trouble and like he hadn't slept for weeks. He paid cash, which even 2 years ago was usually a bad sign. I gave him his key and he went to his room. About 5 minutes later, he came back in a huff, yelling. He had a long object inside his coat with his hand on it. He didn't threaten me, but I was on edge. He threw the key over the desk and told me that it didn't work. I looked and let him know that wasn't the key that I gave him. So of course it didn't work. He found the right key and stormed off. About 2 hours later, the police arrive, and one is holding one of those parabolic listening devices. They asked if I'd checked the dude in and what room he was in. He was wanted for armed robbery with a shotgun. I gave them the info and they went and staked out the room and arrested him when he came out. It is pretty scary thinking back on it. I'm sure the long object under his coat was the shotgun. Story 6. A man was checking into a room that was under his wife's name. She did not add his name to the room, so I could not let him in. I had to call the wife to get permission. We do this for guest safety. I couldn't get a hold of her and he was livid. He didn't want to show me his ID. "Don't you know who I am?" I have been staying here for 14 years. The hotel was 4 years old. I was very new at the job as well, like 3 months. Once I did have his ID, he was threatening me and my job, saying I would regret the day I did this to him. His wife was gonna kill me. Eventually got a hold of his wife. She gave approval. She was so sweet. I smiled and gave him the room key. He told me to go fuck myself. This whole thing was like 30 minutes. Story 7. I used to work the night audit shift as I was a night manager, and we had this one guy who became a serious issue. He would periodically come in, but if it was early, like 2 a.m., stroll in. If he saw that there were 2 females, he'd claim the shower wasn't working properly. When you went up, he would start to undress when you had your back to him. Our management was absolutely shitty and wouldn't care. So we made it an unofficial rule that if we worked alone or it was myself and the other female, we would just tell him that our staff policy changed and was now that 2 people had to come up to the room. After that, he just stopped coming less and less. I'm not sure what happened to him, as I was one of the 10 people that management fired because we knew what was going on at the hotel. The main manager was sleeping with the maintenance man while she was still married, and he was sleeping with her daughter, who may or may not have worked there. That was a blessing in disguise, though I met some cool people that I still talk to today, and that was over 10 years ago. Story 8. I've told this story in the hotel front desk sub, but here goes. Elderly woman who stayed with her son who had mental disabilities. She'd sold her house and hadn't bothered to even start looking for a new place, so was spending her money on a hotel than rather a home. After a while, I switched to another hotel, and don't give her a second thought until she starts staying at that new hotel. She'd built up a ton of reward points and would pay for her room with those points whenever possible. One day her point reservation was up, and when she came in, I waved her over and quietly asked if she wanted to use points again for that night, or pay with a card. She said she'd pay, and I thought that'd be it. Nope. Next day I was told I had a guest complain about me, which I assumed was a joke. No, she'd made a complaint about me, saying that I had screamed at her, in front of a lobby full of people, that she owed me money. I refused to have anything to do with her after that. Story 9. I've got a couple. There's a lady who has been a regular guest at my hotel for decades and is crazy entitled. Recently she decided she didn't like the room she was given, but rather than tell the front desk, she found a maintenance worker and got him to let her into a room that wasn't hers by claiming that she'd lost her key. Then she proceeded to move all of her stuff into the new room. Another guest was a homeless lady who had been staying at the hotel for a few months. Apparently a friend of her father's was paying for it. One night she was found in the dry storage room stealing food. When she was evicted, they found her room was full of giant piles of stuff she'd apparently been stealing throughout her entire stay. It was like a hoarder's house. The next day, she snuck back into the hotel and tried to steal more stuff, then set up a camp in the parking lot until the police were called. Finally, years ago, I was working at a hostel in Kiev. We had this one guest who was absolutely disgusting. He would sit in the kitchen and shovel food into his mouth while staring off into space, crumbs falling all over his body and the floor, then eventually get up and leave without cleaning up after himself. He never talked and he smelled awful. One night when I was thankfully out with my ex, apparently he shit himself in his sleep so badly it woke up everyone in the dorm. My coworker was unable to wake him up and he didn't seem to be breathing, so he called an ambulance. Paramedics came to revive him. Apparently he's taken a bunch of pills while drinking. Everyone in that dorm had to sleep in the common room that night. All the bedding was thrown away, and the smell still lingered for a couple of days. Story 10. Far too many to list them all, unfortunately. One of the worst was during my first week not in training, love it, where I was thankfully in the back office right behind the desk doing some reservations work instead of being at the desk, where I'd mostly been during training. A groom had emailed our team and asked us to please go into their room and get the bride's dress to steam it before their wedding the next day. We made sure we had permission to enter the room and whatnot, and our staff, though very uncomfortable, got the dress. She noticed right away that there were rips and dirty spots on the dress, which she took pictures of as soon as she opened the dress bag. Timestamps lined up right after she got the dress. There was no way she could have done it. The bride came down after screaming at our staff and accusing our staff of trying to steal her dress and then destroying it, making it unwearable. It was a few tiny rips and smudged spots that, again, we didn't do. Was running around the lobby screaming at the top of her lungs, threatening to get violent with staff, screaming that her rich daddy would have the hotel closed down and all of us fired. It was a luxury hotel in a major US city. Her belief was that we stole her dress, wrecked it for fun, steamed it, and then put it back in the room. How any of that makes sense? No clue. Our manager calmly asked her to step around the desk and read the email from her fiancé telling us to do this and that the bride requested it. She accused us of lying, despite the email proof from his direct email address. When the groom came down, our manager pointed out that he'd asked us to do that, and he played dumb. The day after the wedding, her father came down to check out and berated our staff full, upsetting his daughter before her wedding and asked for discounts. We said no. Genuine psycho behavior. Hope she got therapy. Story 11. An entitled Karen burned a bag of microwavable popcorn, threw it out in the hallway, and called down to me at the front desk and demanded I come get it at that exact moment. I was the only one working at the time in a college town during football season. I had several groups in the lobby waiting for me to get to them, and I was so busy. I told her I couldn't come up there right then, and I'd be there when I could. She flipped out and started yelling at me, so I told her I was very sorry and I hung up. She then proceeded to scatter the burned popcorn and the bag in the elevator, which I found out about from another guest that witnessed her throwing a loud tantrum. She then came down to the front desk laughing, pointing, and taking pictures of me saying she was reporting me to corporate. I'll never forget that horrible woman, and thankfully I never heard a thing from my boss about it. I left that job a few months later. I had many other situations happen, and I'm actually not sure she was the worst one now that I think about it. Hotel work isn't for me. Story 12. I worked in one of those all-inclusive giga hotels in Spain. For a fixed price, you have a fixed week of holidays together with thousands of other guests. Check-ins were like guiding a herd of sheep. This story is about an older lady, I assume between 60 to 70 years of age, from the UK. Before she entered the hotel, we were already informed that this guest might be troublesome. Apparently, she visited regularly, like 3 times a year, and always came by herself. The majority of her holiday week, she would hang around the check-in counter complaining about all sorts of things. My idea was that her complaints were the only way how she learned how to communicate with others and effectively to get rid of her loneliness. As the week progressed, me and my colleagues instinctively started to ignore her as most of her complaints had nothing to do with the hospitality of the hotel, and ignoring her pissed her off. So here we go. One evening, on like her 4th day, she came running and screaming into the lobby, accusing the hotel of robbing her. She said she was already very suspicious of all the staff members, so when she took a shower that evening, she put a shoe on her dining time. When she finished her shower, according to her, the shoe was on the floor instead of on the table. So someone must have entered her room to rob her. Then she called the police and things kinda escalated. Since the story was so full of holes, the Spanish police didn't do much, and at the end of her stay, she greeted us and said, "See you in 3 months." Story 13. The couple on the 9th floor room in full view of the 10th floor restaurant in the neighboring tower late evening, dark, with all their lights on, having romping sex with their curtains wide open. Restaurant manager called me at the front desk to figure out which room it was and to alert them they had an audience. Oh, they knew and just thanked me for calling and carried on. Hotel manager had to go up and have a chat with them and point out there were children in the restaurant too. Then there was the fellow who jumped from one of the towers one night, and we didn't know until someone came in to say there was a body outside. Just horrible. Lots of hookers with damp cash who wanted change, but no way was I touching those bills. Then they'd act like I was the problem. Drunken guests making everyone miserable. Other guests soliciting the bellman or room service guys for sex. Much more common than with female staff. Worse was the old ex-military hotel security duo who used any excuse to beat up homeless guys just trying to stay warm in the stairwells. Not really answering your question is overall, there was lots of entitled trash and poor souls who came through the doors. Story 14. Had a guest one time that was problematic from check-in. First, he had a huge problem. I had no clue who he was, saying he was here all the time, even though I worked most days of the week and had never seen him before. Once I finally got his name and started checking him in, he asked how much the room cost. I told him the price, and he immediately started complaining that it was too expensive, even though he had booked the room online himself and paid. Not much I can do but keep checking him in and offer a free drink from the bar, which he very quickly took. Later in the evening, he came in with what we assumed to be a prostitute and drank heavily at the bar, then stumbled back to his room to do the deed with his lady friend. At some point in the night, I received a phone call that I needed to come back to the hotel because apparently he had fallen asleep in the shower and laid over the shower drain, flooding not only his room, but the next 2 floors under him. He then blamed us for having shitty shower drains and refused to pay the damages. Now I remember his name. Story 15. I have too many, but we'll start with one. I was working in a party hostel in Prague, and it was just after lockdown, so there were barely any guests. Anyways, the owners opted to allow a family of Syrian refugees, a father and 2 teenage sons, to stay for free through an NGO. Anyways, they are in a dorm room, and opposite them is the bathroom. My duty at night is to check the bathrooms, and I find the toilet opposite them completely covered in shit. I concluded that someone must have stood on the seat and then squatted. Since this family were the only ones next to it, I figured it had to be them. Worse, they were staying for 3 more nights. So, I tried to explain the next day, but they spoke little English, resulting in me using my skills and mime to try to get my message across. I guess it worked as there were no shit seats after. The family was not horrible, but it was a horrible experience. Story 16. Not a receptionist, but a night porter who had to cover reception. We had a guest who was clearly only staying at the hotel in order to let her friends burgle the bar in the evening. She kept phoning down to reception to make requests, and then whilst I was busy, she would sneak off and open various fire exits. Eventually, they got in as I was doing the rounds with a torch and found them trying to force the shutters on the bar with a crowbar, so I called the police. They were sleeping in a car outside waiting for her to open another fire exit and let them in. I sent the police to her room and she was arrested. The punchline. It turned out she was the hotel manager's sister, and I got a bullocking and threatened with the sack for turning one of the guests into the police. The other incident was when the chefs from the kitchen decided to rent a room. I was doing my evening rounds and caught them having a full-on gangbang with the housekeeping staff in the swimming pool. Story 17. There was a man from England staying at our hotel who had bipolar disorder. At first, he seemed like a decent guy, friendly enough, though a bit unpredictable. However, things started to take a strange turn. One day, he began bringing homeless people into the hotel, partying with them in his room. He even showed up with a hickey after one of these wild nights. It was clear his behavior was spiraling out of control. The situation escalated when, during her morning run near the hotel, an unsuspecting woman became his target. Out of nowhere, he ran after her and punched her for no apparent reason. The poor woman ended up with a terrible black eye and, understandably, called the police. They arrived quickly and arrested him on the spot. As it turns out, the man came from a wealthy family. His father compensated the woman generously for her pain and distress, and as a result, his son was released shortly after the incident. When he was in one of his bad phases, his behavior was even more intolerable. He was rude to everyone, especially the waitstaff and receptionists, making their jobs a nightmare. Story 18. I had a guest who came and complained that his window wasn't closing properly. I offered him a different room. He refused and demanded I come up to fix it. He kicked up a huge fuss until I finally called my duty manager, another woman. He wouldn't settle down until we went up to the room to take a look. He insisted on walking behind us. When we got to the room, we insisted he go in first. He had thrown the table in his room down so it blocked the walkway past the door, and we both refused to enter the room as he clearly wanted us to do while he showed us how the window wouldn't close. My duty manager stepped in and shut the window properly. We retreated to the office and he came down again shortly after, claiming there was another issue and he needed us to come up again. When we refused, he said we were racist for not helping him. After my duty manager shut him down, we didn't see him again for the duration of his stay. He definitely wanted to get us alone in that room. Still creeped out just thinking about it. I'm not sure if he was just a predator or if he was on drugs, but his behavior was definitely erratic. Story 19. It's always about poop. I'm in maintenance, but I work closely with front desk. A guest had laid some tissues down at the front desk and left them. The FD girl didn't notice them for a while, and when she finally did, she noticed a certain stench. Thought okay, maybe it was their dog. She threw them away and wiped herself down with Clorox because EW. She was ranting to me about it when I had to go to the bathroom and discovered shitty paper towels in the trash and a toilet seat covered in shit. It was even on the stall walls. How? My boss told a story of a wedding reception and how a lady had gotten piss-drunk and shat herself, leaving a trail from the meeting room all the way to the elevator and the carpet in the halls. It's always poop. Story 20. Had a guest take a bunch of plates, silverware, etc. from the breakfast. They filled a children's carriage and dumped everything in their room for the cleaners to fix later. Another time a guest tried billing to a non-existent store, quickly racked up a bill over $1,800 for the entire stay, and ate for $800 the first night. They called us racist when we threw her and the rest of her family out the same evening. They never paid for anything either. During the few hours they stayed, they also trashed the room. The family, their small children, were caught stealing from a nearby store not long after. Trashy people like playing the victim card. Great times, probably forgetting someone. Story 21. Toss up on this one. I worked audit shift at a small chain in Midwestern US. Late nights bring all sorts. First guy, he was a trip. Second guy was less entertaining. First guy walked down from his room in a tank top, towel, and combat boots. What kind of gun is this? Guy proceeds to lay a .22 pistol on the counter. I immediately unloaded it, mag and an extra now on the counter out of his reach. I told him what I thought. He didn't believe me, said it was a 9mm. which it wasn't, but hey, not my problem, per se. Gave him his gun back and ammo, which he wasn't too upset about as I said he'd get them back on checkout. Dude leaves, goes to Walmart, and pulls the same shtick. They called the cops. Everybody talked, and he was let go on the grounds of just being stupid. They then sell him ammo. So back he comes, all laughing it off. Said I was right, it was a .22, and told me the Wally World tale. He then asks if there's a place to shoot on the property. Nope, sure ain't. That sucks, but I get it, he said. The guy then proceeds to walk outside, step purposefully off our property/parking lot, and shoots the Applebee's sign across the street. When he came back in, I asked to see the gun as I haven't seen one like it in ages. He hands it right over. So I unloaded it yet again and put it all in secure storage for checkout to deal with. He was shockingly okay with all of this. The other guy? Yeah, the drunkest one of the wedding party, crying and shouting in the halls. So I go to talk to him and get him to go back to his room. He ends up trying to strangle me against the hallway wall. He caught a knee to the stones and an accidental headbutt that busted his nose wide open. Getting away, I called the cops. They were maybe stationed 5 miles away. His friends tried to get me to not call the cops because he wouldn't like that. Too late for that, right? The guy comes back to the desk, threatening me just as the cops arrived. He resisted arrest in spectacular fashion. This man took not one, not two, but 3 tasers to keep him down. Taser confetti and piss everywhere. What a job. Story 22. I worked in Las Vegas in college and worked at a major resort on the Strip. We had one guest in particular, a popular singer. I will not mention her name, but I will say that she is fully thawed this time of year. She was not only the worst guest I ever worked with, but also one of the worst human beings I worked with. When her car was in the port cochere, no cars under $100,000 were allowed to be in the area, even if her car was just parked. Cabs were supposed to drop off guests on the upper port cochere, so hundreds of cab drivers had to be diverted to the lower, creating huge backups. They would get in one lane anticipating being sent up top, and now had to be moved across 3 lanes of queued traffic to go to the lower. The lobby and casino floor needed to be cleared whenever she was passing through so nobody could bother her. She refused to use the back entrance that every other major celebrity used. She demanded housekeeping 3 times per day and demanded her staff's rooms be treated the same. She did not want to see any of the staff at any time unless they were directly interacting with her or her staff. She was just a plain vile person to anyone she viewed as beneath her. My wife and I had a table at a nightclub that night, and she was there because her so was DJing that night. She had an entire section of the club blocked off, and security kept one of the bathrooms clear for her people to use. To counter this, Jay-Z and Beyoncé were the absolute best celebrity guests I have ever worked with. Story 23. I managed a hotel near the beach in Rhode Island, managed for a room, and got paid by the hour to clean. We had a room with a broken shower. 4th of July weekend. Rooms are $300 a night, this was the 90s, and $150 for no shower. Most of these rooms were booked a year in advance. People would literally book the same room for next year. I've been telling people since 6 p.m. that no shower room is the only thing available for 60 miles. Because I was nice enough to call around for people, finally, around 10 someone just takes it. Some family from earlier comes back at like midnight screaming at me insisting I said I'd hold that room for them. No bro, I don't hold rooms on 4th of July weekend. He demanded I let him and his 4 kids sleep in the closed-in gazebo thing. Like, no, it's locked up. The credit card machine is there. Get out. He literally grabbed and shook me. I was a 20-something-year-old chick. Good thing the fisherman who kept his room year-round heard. He saved me, and we still had to call the cops. I'd rather deal with ornery, antisocial, slightly off-smelling fishermen who rented rooms off-season and slept on their boats otherwise than tourists. Story 24. UK hotel. Worked there for a few years as night security. Great job, crap pay. Never really had anything major happen. A few stupid fights and stuff between drunk guests was the worst of it. About a month before I left, I was called to the 4th floor because a guest had heard a woman screaming. She had come to the hotel with a man who was a rapist. So I had to basically go in there and fight the rapist, and it was shit. I mean, I suppose I didn't have to, but I felt compelled. I'm very tall and have a somewhat intimidating/angular face, but I'm not that well built. He was quite a short but stocky/gym dude, so it was hard going for me. Luckily, the police had been called, and they arrived after a few minutes, so it didn't go on for too long. Always wondered if I did the right thing. Maybe I made it more traumatic for the woman, and myself if I'm honest. But it is what it is now, hindsight and all that. I left the job shortly after that. Woman was okay physically at least. I had to go to court, etc. As a witness, all that jazz. Guy did get convicted. No idea how she is doing now. hopefully well enough. So yeah, a rapist was my worst guest. Story 25. In the late 80s, my wife was in line at the Atlanta Hyatt Hotel and watched as a man was making a young desk clerk ugly cry and shake. The clerk was so upset she had to go back and get a manager. She stood there and shook. My wife could tell by the smug set of the abusive customer's shoulders that whatever it was, he got what he wanted. He turned around and, to her astonishment, she saw that the horrible customer was entertainer, movie star, comedian, and alleged humanitarian Bob Hope. His trademark smile popped onto his face. He immediately went into star mode. Without filter, my theatrically trained mouth growled, "You should be ashamed of yourself." It rang up the central atrium like I yelled at him in church. The Bob Hope fell off his face, and I have never seen a man run to the elevator bank so fast in my life, she recalls. You can always tell the quality of a person by the way they treat those they would consider beneath them, my wife adds. Story 26. I wasn't front desk, but their best stories were heard around the hotel. This couple and their dog checked into the hotel. I'm going to give them the names of Sam and Pat. They get into a fight, and Sam storms out, leaving Pat and Doggo. Pat stays the night, but to punish Sam, leaves the Doggo at the hotel in one of the staff service areas, where it is found. No one knows who the Doggo belongs to. End of day comes, member of the HR team brings the Doggo home, as it can't be left wandering the hotel, obviously. Next day, Pat wants to reconcile with Sam, but Sam is still upset about Doggo being left behind and won't talk until Pat retrieves it. So Pat comes to the hotel, where staff explain a team member took the Doggo home for safety and will go get it. Pat has a total breakdown and decides they will cause a scene until Doggo is returned. They strip completely naked and climb onto the front desk and sit there, screaming for the Doggo. Police are obviously called. Police show up and chase Pat, who is apparently so slippery that staff are wondering if they'd covered themselves in grease pre-encounter. They had not. For the record, cops eventually catch Pat and take them away. I don't know what happened after that, but Doggo was returned to Sam and Pat eventually. Story 27. Not a receptionist, but I did hotel security for a few places in the back half of the 2000s. 1. Got called a racist by a 150-person wedding party for asking that the literally building-shaking music be turned down. This was around 1:30 in the morning, and they were far from the only people in the hotel. The guy I had relieved when I clocked in warned me that they'd been an issue all weekend. After this, and their refusal to tell the DJ to turn it down, hotel management gave me the go-ahead to kick them out. The cops had to get involved after they threatened me, one guest even making a grab at my weapon, and hotel management. 2. Different hotel. This place was across the street from UAB Hospital in Birmingham, and a big chunk of the guests there were folks who were in town for their spouse, kid, etc. to undergo cancer treatments and other procedures that they couldn't get done at their local hospital. So the management was very strict about noise complaints because, hey, a lot of the folks here are already exhausted and miserable. Got threatened on a few occasions there. 3. Same hotel, noise complaint. I went up to the room, knocked on the door, and I hear from the other side, "Is that the stripper?" It was a bridal party, bridal shower? Whatever the bridal version of a bachelor's party is, and the bride opened the door. I told her I'm flattered, but no, I do need to ask you ladies to keep it down. Thankfully, they were super cool about it. Story 28. I was the night auditor. It was pretty chill. I smoked a ton of weed and watched movies while I folded fitted sheets to perfection. Loved it. So one night, this guy, mid-30s, comes in and we get to talking. I don't know why everyone is so open with me, but he tells me he's expecting his sugar mom, who pretty much finances his life while he bangs her in return. Good for him, honestly. Sweet deal. She comes in. We chat a few times throughout the night. Pretty nice, but kind of annoying. I'm guessing in her 50s? At one point, dude comes out and asks if I wanted a shot. I'm like, sure. I'm underage and will take the opportunity for free alcohol. How stupid. I walk into the room and immediately it smells like cigarette smoke. The room was a mess, and all I can think about is how awkward it was going to be to charge them for it in the morning. She'll just be a moment in the bathroom, she says. So I sit down and try to avoid eye contact with Sugar Baby. Out of nowhere, the bathroom, Sugar Mother walks out completely naked. Giant boobs enter the room first. Only thing out of my mouth is Minkia before I froze. I've had my fair share of couples inquire. I don't want to assume it's the pineapple tattoo I decided to get on my arm, for me, but I don't know what else it could be. That seems rude. Sorry swingers for stereotyping you. Anyways, I'm just a poor little 19-year-old dumbass that smoked a joint 30 minutes before this event takes place. It took me a few minutes to process, but I weaseled my way out. I had to charge her $350 for the cigarettes, and then an additional fee for the alcohol all over the place. She was fine with it, and she gave me an extra $100. It felt kinda yucky, but a buck's a buck. I also had to grocery shop for the bipolar old lady who stayed long-term because the manager felt bad for her. She touched everyone's butts. That was pretty bad too, lol. This post reminded me about her. I will have to try to block her from my memory all over again. Story 29. I'm that guest. A couple months ago, I was staying in Minneapolis for a conference. One night, while I was sleeping, I had a bloody nose. When I woke up, it looked like a massacre. There was blood smeared everywhere on the white sheets, white comforter, and white pillows. I cleaned it up as best as I could and left a $100 bill out for the cleaning staff, hoping they would skip my room that day. When I got back that night, the room was completely blood-free, but the cleaning staff were so good, they didn't even touch the tip I left them. On the little hotel writing pad, I wrote a note saying sorry for the mess and, to make it up to them, here is some money. The next day, I get back and the money and note are untouched. By this time, I'm starting to get frustrated and this pattern continues for the rest of the trip. I even added to the pot, but the cleaning staff were professional to a fault. When I checked out, I put the cash in an envelope with the note and handed it to the front desk person to hand to the cleaners. I just hope they got the money and don't have me pegged as a problem guest who bleeds all over the bedding. Story 30. Huge sport conference during hurricane season, with a formed storm being watched. Storm got bigger, headed right for our faces. Hotel was under a mandatory evacuation, which we announced both via speakers and flyers, with lists of places they could relocate to in a safer area. One gentleman came down and was livid. He wanted us to 1. Refund his entire stay. Obviously people are refunded for the days of the evacuation, but he wanted a refund for the days he'd already stayed as well. 2. Make a reservation for him at a place of his choosing, and 3. Pay for his new accommodations and transport his family and luggage. This is while the hotel is actively being evacuated, so people and luggage are everywhere. He's standing at the desk, yelling so fiercely he was spitting, telling us it was our fault and we would have to make it right. He refused to step aside to allow any other guests to be helped, and ratcheted up to threats. We had to call the police to have him removed, while he's still screaming that we ruined the tournament by allowing a hurricane. Story 31. I worked at a cheap motel about 15 years ago that had the big indoor atrium area with a pool and hot tub. We had locals that liked to come enjoy the pool for a staycation. There was this one lady who was a regular and would come a few times a year, and I would always recognize her but didn't have any meaningful interactions. Well, she was there with her kids and staying for multiple days, but paying by the day in cash. Checkout time was noon and my shift started at 3 p.m. I got there, and the owner let me know she was in the pool with her kids but hadn't paid for the day yet. So he deactivated her keys and let her know it was time to pay up. Boss left for the day, so I was manning the front desk alone, and about an hour into my shift the atrium, the lobby door flew open and slammed into the wall. It made a massive noise, and I was stunned it didn't shatter the glass door. She immediately is screaming at me, and I was really trying to calm her down and explain that I was only doing what my boss had told me to. I told her I know she's a regular, and that I was sorry this was happening, but let's just sort it out and move on. She wasn't having any of it, and just continued to scream at me in the lobby, saying she had never seen me before. I pretty much told her, "Look lady, this is the situation we're in. You can settle down and pay me, or you can leave." I had to reactivate her keys so she could go get money, and when she came back in she threw the money at me, still being horrible to me, and I just told her I changed my mind and she could get out. I told her in 15 minutes I would be around to check on the room, and if she wasn't gone I was calling the cops. She was vile to me the entire time when I was trying to be polite, connect with her, and bring everything down a notch. Throwing the money at me crossed the line and I was done. Never saw her again after that. That was the most horrible guest I remember dealing with, but that job got me lots of stories. Worked there for 4 years while I was in school, and it was wild sometimes. Like the homeless guy who tried to sleep in the sauna, the cops chasing a dude who bailed out during a high-speed chase, a young guy who was with a tree-cutting crew who died in the room, the tweaker who tipped me more than my entire paycheck, the maintenance man who murdered the head housekeeper in a room while she was cleaning it. The list goes on, lol. Story 32. Guy runs into the lobby completely naked, covering his junk with his hands, bouncing up and down like a 3-year-old who can't hold his pee. He's yelling for directions to the bathroom. I direct him to the right, but he instead runs left towards the banquet area where a wedding is taking place. Then the screaming started behind the doors. I take it the wedding wasn't expecting that. He runs back out in the lobby with liquid shit covering his legs and ass, and he's sobbing uncontrollably. He was escorted out by police when he wouldn't leave, and the entire wedding party had their rooms and banquet rental comped by the GM. Story 33. I was at one point. I've been traveling the Middle East for work for a couple of years and I always stayed in high-end hotels with 4 or 5 stars. They aren't that expensive, and my assignment over there paid for it. Usually, I booked a suite, so I had the living room to invite business partners over to have a small meeting or demo on the equipment I brought. Now, after a couple of years, you become adjusted to the level of service these places offer, especially when you stay in a suite. So a short while later, I was in Amsterdam for a trade show, and I stayed in a 2-star hotel since Amsterdam is fucking expensive, and I forgot a comb and a toothbrush. Drunk as fuck, I phoned the front desk and asked. No, demanded that they would bring it up to my room, at which point they just laughed at me and hung up. Story 34. I worked for a real estate company in a tourist town. Condo and cottage owners would list their properties for rent, short-term vacation, through this real estate company. If there was any issue needing repair, no one was physically on site to fix the problem. The complaint would come in and we would contact a local contractor for the repair. A tenant called in stating his toilet was backed up. We couldn't get a plumber out fast enough, so he filled up a bucket with human excrement, drove to the real estate company, walked in and dumped the contents on top of the leasing agent's desk. He was arrested, and the office closed down for 2 days. Story 35. Had one guest who posed as a CIA agent to get the government rate. She then proceeded to have me switch her into 3 different rooms as they were security hazards. One was because it was adjoining, the other because it had a thermostat outside of it, and the other was too close to the maintenance closet. I ended up finding her a room, and when I did, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You've done your country a great service, young man. You'll be on everyone's list now." I then got tipped $20, but she caused many problems for the rest of the desk staff, it sounds like. Story 36. Roughly about 40 minutes before my shift ended, so around 6:20 a.m. on a Monday morning, my coworker alerted me that someone was lying on the ground in the main corridor. We run to help see a young man, early 20s, with a puddle of piss in front of him and a pile of shit behind him. It was clear he was all right, so we shook him awake and dragged him up. He started shouting and crying while we tried to find out who he was. He denied it was him who soiled the carpet. We found out his room he was sharing with his supervisor. Oh yes, he was here on work. First thing out his mouth when he showed his handiwork, "You fliffy fucking bastard." Here's the kicker. Boy's dad is the owner of the company, and he made the 2.5-hour drive to the job site to drag him back to the hotel and apologize to the whole staff and pay out of his own money for the carpet cleaning. Story 37. I've been that guest, and I only found out 2 weeks later. At a wedding, in another country, I walked out of my room at 2 a.m. in just my boxer briefs. I ended up going up and down in an elevator with no idea what was happening. A night porter came to help me, but evidently, I thought he was attacking me and I hit him with an elbow and scampered off. There was no real damage done, thank goodness. Somehow I made it back into my room. My wife slept through the whole thing. We departed early that morning to go visit family completely separate from the wedding. I have no recollection of any of this, and neither my wife nor I had any clue it happened until 2 weeks later. At the airport back to my home country, we ran into the bride and groom. They mentioned, "Did you hear about the commotion at the hotel with the night porter?" And we replied that we had not. They told the story from the hotel's perspective. I said, "That's funny. I've sleptwalked before. I really hope that wasn't me." And my wife said, "Now that you mention it, at one point in the night, I think I remember you were up and said you had trouble finding your way back from the toilet, but I didn't think anything of it because you just got back in bed and I thought it was all sorted out." Then I said, "Now that you mention it, the hotel door was slightly ajar in the morning, and I thought we must have just neglected to shut it last night." It dawned on us that I was definitely the mystery, almost naked sleepwalker. We relayed our apologies to the hotel, but only after we were back in our home country and free of any potential international incident. They were remarkably understanding and said they'd still been scratching their heads trying to figure out how it all happened and why no one could figure out who it was. All well in the end. And I'm just glad it didn't happen in America, where I'd surely have been shot dead. Story 38. We had one lady try to fistfight our lobby manager because we didn't kick out a guest the night before who was being rambunctious. The next night he stole a jacket, so he ended up getting banned/arrested. But according to one of the people with the guy who got his jacket stolen, we should have gotten him arrested the night before for being rude, literally implying that we were refusing to do anything, while the man is being walked out in cuffs, mind you, because he was black. Tried to jump the counter when the manager pointed out that the night before, he hadn't done anything illegal and stopped being obnoxious when asked. It was a whole shit show, and I'm pretty sure her entire group ended up getting banned as well because they kept trying to escalate. Story 39. This is my worst guest by far. Pretty tame compared to other comments, but it comes with a bonus petty response from yours truly. One night I had a guest that asked me to make sure some dead flies were cleaned off the windowsill in his room. He stressed to me it's very important, and will I please be sure to get it taken care of. I said, of course, I'll make sure to let housekeeping know, and we'll be done ASAP. I would have done it myself, but that wasn't policy. There was a running housekeeping log specifically for this exact reason. Wrote the room number and details about the flies on the windowsill, as well as talked to the head of housekeeping directly. It was the only housekeeping note for that day. Thought nothing of it, but when I was working my swing shift the next day, he came back down to the desk. Apparently, the housekeepers either forgot or were too lazy to do it. It wasn't the first time it happened. The housekeepers were pretty damn lazy and always had complaints about dirty tubs, hair in the drains, generally just bad cleanup jobs, etc. They always apologized and did nothing about it. So needless to say, I was slightly annoyed. Anyways, when I say the guest was irate, he was beyond that. Dude was beside himself, cursing me out, causing a scene saying this hotel is a piece of shit. It wasn't. I'm worthless, yada yada. Keep in mind that I always got great guest reviews. Felt bad for the guy, to be honest. I suppose he could be a hypochondriac or something. In his defense, I didn't think he was wrong and I actually agreed with him. He did express to me how important it was and I didn't get it done. And it's not hard to take 5 minutes to clean a few flies off a windowsill FFS. I was 19 at the time and naive about how things work in a corporate setting. Up until then, I worked for my dad as a carpenter during the summers, so all I knew was construction etiquette, or lack thereof, and banter up to that point. I was working this job part-time while I was in college, so didn't really care for the job and just needed extra money. However, after I got bitched out for 10 minutes and having to use my customer service mask to cater to this guest, my attitude changed to very annoyed. It's not my job to clean rooms per hotel policy, and felt they put me in this situation because of their incompetence. Then the light bulb moment happened. I thought, fuck it, they don't give two shits about what is written in this logbook, so they probably won't see it anyways. So, in my fog of naivety, I wrote in the housekeeping log. A guest came down very upset because housekeeping decided it wasn't important to read this logbook. Why do I write stuff in this logbook if nobody does it anyways? And on the next line, you forgot the flies on the windowsill. Maybe it slipped your mind again. Please do that. You know, super passive-aggressive shit'll. They were the only notes written on the page in large lettering, so you couldn't miss it. It was too funny because when I left around midnight, and when I got there the next day, nobody said anything to me about it. However, later that night, the head of housekeeping came down and told me, never write something like that down in this log again. This is for serious requests only. I can't believe you would do something like that. She was a very unlikable person, and we had butted heads about this in the past, so I responded, if you just did your job, then I wouldn't have to. She stormed out of the room like a toddler having a tantrum. I couldn't care less, and honestly wanted everyone to see how incompetent she was and show she didn't care about putting her coworkers in a bad situation because of it. The next day, I was voted off the island LOL. Was fired for some other menial red tape reason, but I saw a few of the housekeepers I got along with a few months later, and they told me it was because I pissed off housekeeping manager and she demanded I be fired. The silver lining was that she never changed her ways, so was reprimanded, fired, and there was sweeping changes to the way logbooks were looked at. I like to think I took one for the team LOL. Good times. Story 40. Local celebrity, news anchor on a very local TV station with very limited range. Thought he was some big name, so was making wild demands. Demanded discounts, freebies, and wanted room service. We didn't offer room service, because he's too famous to eat in the restaurant and would cause a scene if he showed up with people wanting to meet him. Spoiler, no one cared. He was such a douche. By comparison, we also hosted Alice Cooper, a genuine celebrity, who was kind, gracious, very generous with his time, and incredibly humble. Couldn't believe that young people knew who he was and was genuinely shocked when my then 17-year-old trainee brought in her vinyl collection for him to autograph. He said something like, "These have got to be your dad's albums." He was chuffed that they were hers and she was a fan. Just a really nice dude who just wanted to play golf and chill. Story 41. Had a guest that stayed at least once a month, usually bringing several family members with her. Despite her apparent love of our hotel, she complained about everything every time to get her rooms heavily discounted. This should have been enough to bar her from staying. But no, we had to continue treating her like royalty for some reason. Then she shot one of her family members during an argument in her room. This had to get the entire family put on the do not rent list, right? Nope. Management welcomed her back with open arms. She must have had dirt on someone because she continued to treat staff like shit and got her $200 rooms discounted down to free nearly every time she stayed. Story 42. My wife works night audit, so she has a lot of wild stories. but many of them are similar to other stories in this thread, so I'll share one of the odder ones that resulted in the police coming out. There was one night when she had a late check-in show up with his suitcase and check in like everything was normal. He was from out of the country, but we live somewhere that gets a lot of tourism, and the hotel is in a part of town a lot of people want to go to. So none of this is even a little bit out of the ordinary. What's less ordinary is that he went up to his room, and then 10 or 15 minutes later came back down without his suitcase, having changed his clothes and with a hat on. He dropped his card in the checkout drop box, but seemed to be trying to hide the fact that he was doing so. This was obviously pretty suspicious. She tried calling the phone number they had on file for the guest, and it went straight to voicemail. She called security, who called the police. The man came back shortly before the police got there, came up to the front desk, and said he lost his key and asked for a new one, like he didn't know he had been seen dropping it in the checkout box. Everything ended up being fine, but to this day she doesn't know why he put the key in the drop box and then claimed to have lost it. Story 43. By myself, running a 10-room inn with 7 checkouts. I handle front desk, house cleaning, everything. Guest is a stay-over and asks me to clean her room. I tell her I will be there at 2:30 because I have to get the other rooms cleaned and ready first. Response is a heavy sigh. No thank you. 2:30 rolls around. I knock and she partially opens the door, flustered and red-faced. Says, "Oh, let me just throw some clothes on." Wait 10 minutes, go in, and sex toys everywhere. Largest butt plug I've ever seen is just sitting on the windowsill. Put that shit away if you know I'm coming in to clean. Don't be pleasuring yourself at the time I told you I'd show up. That, or the couple that fucked while she was on her period. Looked like a murder scene. Did that 2 days in a row, had to change out bloody sheets. Story 44. Not a hotel receptionist, but an ex-head housekeeper. The jacuzzi suite was rented for 5 days. They didn't want service. This was before the checks every 3 days were required after the Las Vegas Pew Pew incident. They wouldn't leave or extend on their last day. As the head housekeeper, I was 18 at the time. I was the one to knock with the front desk and then use the manual override to get in the room. We get in there, and there are hot plates everywhere with meth cooking. The couple is passed out on the floor. Meth had exploded and gone everywhere in the room. We call the emergency services, and they get the couple to the hospital. I turn to my GM and tell her we are putting them on the do not rent a list, and she agrees, and I ask who we call to clean it up. She says, "You can call the other housekeepers." That's the day we all got to scrape meth off the walls and mirrors. P.S. The GM rented it out the next day. Story 45. So, this dude checks into our hotel, super chill, like he's got it all together. Asks for the biggest suite we've got, and we're like, cool, enjoy. Fast forward a day, and there's this gnarly smell wafting through the hallway. We thought, maybe he left room service sitting out too long or something. No big deal. By the next morning, the whole floor's straight up stinking, and other guests are starting to complain. My manager's like, all right, time to check this out. We knock. No answer. Finally, we let ourselves in, and OMG. The guy had turned the suite into a freaking jungle. There were iguanas chilling on the furniture, snakes just vibing on the floor, and, get this, a loud-ass parrot flying around, squawking like it owned the place. Bro had smuggled in a whole zoo. He tells us, all serious, "I wanted to feel at home. Bruh, this ain't National Geographic." The parrot shredded the curtains. Some snake peed on the carpet. Yes, snakes can pee LMAO. And it was a whole biohazard zone by the time we got him out of there. Dude ended up getting charged thousands for the damage. Took weeks to clean that room up. It was wild. Story 46. I'm not a receptionist, but I am a breakfast attendant at a hotel and was harassed pretty badly by a guest. I remember I came back from a few weeks vacation for my mental health. I was going through a lot during this time and already wasn't feeling up to working. I would go and give it my all. But for this guest, that wasn't enough. The first interaction I had with this woman was on my second weekend back. I was getting ready to close down breakfast, and as I was stocking some things, she came up to me and pointed at some crumbs on the counter. She told me, "You should wipe this down," and I replied with a smile saying, "Okay." And then she got upset and yelled at me and said, "No, you need to do it now." She walked away, rolled her eyes, and called me stupid under her breath. I let it go and proceeded to keep working. I told my manager about it, though, just in case the woman went and complained. I ended up finding out that this specific guest has been doing similar things like this since the beginning of her stay. There are only 2 breakfast attendants, me and my other coworker. We will call her Mary. There is another girl who covers from time to time, and we will call her Brittany. This woman apparently said that she thinks every other breakfast attendant and housekeeper is stupid other than Mary, and she only likes Mary. She also complained, saying she couldn't believe that our job would hire people who can't speak English. After getting a rundown on who she was, I thought I was prepared until the following weekend. I was already having a pretty rough day. It was extremely busy, and I also got our delivery restock. So I had boxes all over the kitchen, and I was behind on getting the food out. The same lady slammed open the kitchen door and proceeded to scream at me saying, "There's no food." I replied and said, "Yeah, I know it's coming." She walked out, scoffed, and rolled her eyes. After that incident, I went out to stock any other things while the food finished, like plates, napkins, cups, etc. And I'm not even kidding, this lady was walking behind me throwing insults at me. She was watching my every move. At this point, I felt extremely uncomfortable and overwhelmed, so I just started sobbing. I was alone in the kitchen with no help, so I texted my boss, begging her to come give me support. The receptionist, we will call her Marissa, came in and asked me what was going on so she could let my boss know the details over the phone. I told her everything, and apparently, the lady was eavesdropping the entire time. When me and Marissa walked out of the kitchen, the lady proceeded to say she's going to call corporate on us and sue Marissa for lying. My boss finally showed up and decided to send me home early. I walked out in tears, and as I was driving away, I saw my boss talking to the lady outside. What I found out was the lady got aggressive with my boss, started recording their conversation, and continued to make threats about suing Marissa. That whole day, she was walking back and forth from the front desk, making snarky comments to Marissa and trying to eavesdrop on what my boss was saying about the situation in the back office. Our general manager told us if she doesn't check out that same day, then we need to kick her out. Thankfully, she did check out that day, and she is no longer welcome back to our hotel. And if she ever steps foot into the hotel again, we will get the police involved. But the story doesn't stop there. After the incident, the lady proceeded to call our hotel for weeks, saying she left a robe. Now, I'm not sure if she did or not, but all I know is she was harassing our receptionist for weeks about it, to the point where we had to tell her if she needed anything further, she could contact our chief operating officer. Since then, we haven't heard from her. Story 47. Not a receptionist, but I was waiting in line at a hotel in Vegas when the Karen in front of me started throwing a tantrum because the receptionist said her room wouldn't be ready by 3 p.m., yelling and stamping her feet, going off on the poor woman. What am I supposed to do until then? Bitch, you're in fucking Vegas. There's a million things to do to fill the next 4 hours. She was a literal Karen too, asking to speak to the manager and all that, as if she's never been to a hotel before. Sometimes your room is ready right away, and sometimes it's not. That's how it works. This is why I could never work in a job dealing with the general public. If someone ever did that to me, I'd just tell them to go fuck themselves and would probably get fired as a result. Story 48. I worked at a downtown Seattle Red Lion/Coast hotel as a front desk agent for a few years. We had some doozies, no doubt, but the worst was when a guy, not sure if it was a purpose act of end of life or accidental, but he died from huffing something from a plastic bag while laying on the bed. The next evening, when he didn't check out, and we got no response from his room, we had to send up security to check the room. This was back when the 12th floor was still a smoking floor. This hotel refused to acknowledge that there was a 13th floor, so they skipped from 12 to 14. Every time some a-hole started complaining about something that was out of my hands, child crying in the adjacent room, noise from other guests in the hall, and demanded a room change, we always put them in the room where that guy died. Nighty-night. Story 49. I briefly worked at a hotel when I was in college. So, had a guest stumble into the lobby, wanting a room for the night. I could tell he was drunk off his ass. I should have turned him away, but I didn't. He said his wife kicked him out of the house that night, and he needed to sleep. He pulled out a wad of cash to pay for the room, and tried to tip me a $5 bill down my shirt for being so nice to him. Anyway, I didn't hear anything the whole night from this guy. Cue the next day when housekeeping comes and my manager calls me asking about this dude I checked in. Apparently, he shit all over the room. The floor, the walls, bed, shower, everything. They had to close off that room for a week and get a professional cleaning crew. Hotel housekeeping couldn't even clean it up. Story 50. We had parents who left 2 children they'd smuggled in the room during a, fortunately minor and well-contained, but very real fire, then blamed us for the children being in danger. Basically, they booked the room for just 2 adults. Somehow managed to get the 2 children into the room. Don't know how, but they did. Small kids, about 3 and 5 years old. Middle of the night, fire alarm goes off as there's a fire in one of the hotel rooms. A smoker who didn't want to get wet and cold by going outside, then failed to extinguish the cigarette correctly and the fire spread from there. Not sure how, but the parents end up outside with the children left inside. I'd guess the parents opened the door to check and basically got caught up in the mass exodus, leaving the children behind. Probably so we didn't catch them when we would do our checks. We do our checks outside at the fire assembly point, comparing known guests in the room to how many were outside. Hooray. Everyone is safely accounted for. But when the actual fire becomes visible, they start screaming at one of my colleagues that their children are inside. We check our head count. Nope, room is 2 adults, no kids. They insisted we had to go back inside to collect their children, which so far as we're concerned, don't exist. By this stage, the fire engine had just arrived and naturally refused entry to everyone until it was safely extinguished. We report everyone is safely evacuated, but then my unfortunate colleague comes over and reports there could be 2 undocumented children inside. Fortunately for all involved, the fire was far from their room. The firemen quickly sent someone along who swiftly rescued these 2 children who were clearly terrified. Once the all-clear was given, we got everyone into the unaffected wing of the hotel, moving across those in the affected area. The following morning, these parents demand to raise an official complaint through the manager because we wouldn't enter the building to rescue their children. My manager, being the awesome bloke that he was, simply told them that it was their lie which caused our head count to be wrong, and that his staff had acted fully in accordance with procedure, i.e. get everyone out, count against the register, alert the fire brigade to discrepancies. He then gave them the option of paying for their children, backdated to the start of their visit, with an added substantial fine, or leaving his hotel immediately but with no recompense. They eventually paid. Smuggling the kids in is one thing, but abandoning them during a fire alarm, simply so they didn't get caught. Plus the entitlement that we had to risk our lives to save their kids. Absolutely detestable people, even worse parents. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you on the next one.